Risperidone is probably one of the best studied drugs in autism. This was based on a large multi-site study. It was double-blind, placebo-controlled. Differences were found by 2 weeks, and the differences persisted over time, even when the drug was tapered. The problem with this medication was weight gain. We know that there are many different areas that need intervention in autism. I'm going to just try to talk the last few minutes about a few of them. Adaptive skills. This is real-life skills. This is learning to be independent, self-sufficient. These are central to being independent as an adult. It looks at things like vocational, transport skills. This is where life is lived for the most able people. I literally have one young man who solves equations in his head. He has a favorite kind of mathematical equation. He cannot walk into a McDonald's and get cheeseburger and change because the McDonald's is so stressful socially. And it's so different. Every McDonald's is a little different. So it's an interesting dilemma, but it's an area that needs to be targeted, often neglected by school programs, and it's one of the things that parents can really do. We know communication skills can be worked on throughout life, and increasingly there are aids to help nonverbal people, including adults, be more communicative. These are sometimes high-tech, things like computers, iPhones, assistive devices, but also low-tech things, picture exchange, visual schedules. And again, there's a whole body of work on this that's important. Social skills, most social skills interventions are based on work with preschoolers. This doesn't work so well for school-age children and adults. There's much more limited data on this, social interventions with older individuals and adults, but it's very significant in terms of what we know in the degree of the social skills gap in some of our research studies, which I'll try to show you. In 1 second, let's see if I get there. I'm going to show you the results of a little eye tracking study that we did a few years ago. This is to see what people with autism do and don't look at when watching social scenes. And if I can show you if it works. Come on, here we go. People with autism look back and forth at mouths. Typically, developing people go back and forth to eyes. And the main reason I put this up here is to point out to you that when you look at groups of individuals, this difference in terms of typically developing people and people with autism, able people with autism, looking at eyes, this difference is very, very large. There's a way that you can quantitate this difference. It's something called a Cohen's d statistic, an effect size. It's what's called 3.81 here. It's a massive effect. Our social interventions in autism, our social intervention, social skills groups, their effect size is something like 0.4, which ain't bad as far as treatments go, but when you compare that effect size to the magnitude of this effect, you can see the problem that we're coping with. So we need better approaches to teaching social skills, both in schools and in terms of research, and we need better ways to evaluate it. Sexuality issues become very important as children become older. Again, there's a whole body of work now. There's a whole set of curricula that have been developed, and more resources are available. One of the problems, at least in my experience in the United States, I don't know here in Europe, this is usually women in schools teaching boys who are teenagers about sex, and this doesn't work so well. Better to have siblings, fathers, males involved. It's a complicated set of issues, but it needs to be explicitly targeted. Mental health supports, you just heard. We need to have new models for care, especially as children become older, and we need to have what's more of a life coaching approach, where people tap into and out of services as they need them. They don't necessarily need to be seen on a weekly basis, but they need to be able to come back and get services as they need it. You need to be much more proactive and helpful in terms of teaching skills quite explicitly. How are we doing for time? 5 minutes. Oh, good. Legal issues. For our more able students, they run into trouble with the law. They often get into trouble with the law because they're too rule governed. They're too reliant on the explicit rules. I have one man who stopped in the middle of a crosswalk when the light changed and said, "Don't walk." And the police thought he was suicidal. And it's that kind of thing that gets people into trouble. For our less able students, we have troubles with meltdown, behavioral issues. In my country, especially under the previous president, we had this policy called No Child Left Behind, which paradoxically meant the opposite of every child left behind. But there was this no tolerance. I had children hauled off to jail because they had a meltdown in school. We also need to train police and emergency personnel in terms of responding. As more and more individuals with autism are out in community settings, we need to work on helping our emergency service personnel be prepared to cope responsibly, what to do and what not to do. Some of the things they do are actually just the things that work the opposite way for people with autism. And again, there are many problem situations that could be used as teaching examples very effectively. And finally, there are lots of issues that parents have to cope with as children get older. In my country, these differ depending on the child's age. Under 21, there's one law. Over 21, there's another law that applies. And it's important for parents to realize that. The other thing in my country is people think that they can leave children money and that that will be there for the child after they're gone. If the child has some degree of state supervision, the state will take that money and does. There was a recent horrible example of this. So parents need real help from lawyers and legal professionals in thinking about longer-term issues, again, depending on what their child's level of functioning is. And vocational planning. Obviously, we need to think about this in terms of looking at the whole continuum of resources. I have an adult home I consult with, 6 people, 4 of whom are totally nonverbal. They go out every day, they have jobs, they come home at night, they cook for themselves. Once a week they do their own laundry. They have a wonderful life, but they have a very supported employment situation. But again, to have a range of models of service is really one of the things that we need, including a range of living arrangements. Everything from group homes to supported living, supported apartments to independent living. We have more and more transitional programs that are available now, especially in the States. We're coping with more and more children going to college and vocational schools. These children present special challenges in schools. They can get some special services, but they have to identify as having special services. This is a growing body of work. It's an interesting area, and it's really an area of some challenge for us as a field. Finally, let me just say a bit about emphasis on evidence-based treatments. We're trying more and more to translate research into evidence-based treatments. This presents some very interesting issues. It presents other issues in terms of service and social policy. We deal with many different disciplines and professions, physicians, psychologists, educators. These people sometimes talk different languages, and you have to help them talk enough of the same language to make progress. And finally, for parents, trying to do things that translate what we know into the world of parents. If anyone is interested, if you go to YouTube, I was showing someone last night on my iPhone, there's a whole series of 15 lectures from an undergraduate course at Yale that I've done for the last 25 years on autism. So there's Matt States talking in genetics, Ami Clens talking in the social brain, Kevin Pelfrey, and these are free, and they're on YouTube. And they're right there. So feel free to take a look at those. The importance of networking at meetings like this, which is important. Let me say a word about complementary and alternative treatments, just to know that by definition, if they're complementary and alternative, there's not good data. So it's a problem in terms of when parents say, well, what can you say about this? I can say there's not good data. Doesn't mean it can't be researched, but it must be re-researched to say something. Let me finally say something about the Internet. The Internet's a pros and cons thing. It's great in many ways. The problem with the Internet, if you go into Google and type in autism, you get 15 million hits. I have not looked at all 15 million. I've looked at the top 100. Of the top 100, about 1/3 I would not recommend. And that's a problem. And I wouldn't recommend them either because they're selling something or they're promising something. Or they're both. And I think that's a problem. So it's, again, a dilemma for parents where to get quality information. So in summary, I think there have been many advances. As you can tell from this meeting, it's an exciting time to be in autism research. There are lots of issues in terms of thinking about research, translating research into practice, and hopefully developing new models to have quality care for individuals with autism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.